Lily Thompson was 3 months into her night shift manager position at the McDonald's on Arden Way in Sacramento when she encountered something that still haunts her dreams. It was a typical Tuesday night around 2:30 in the morning when the restaurant was supposed to be closed to walk-in customers, serving only the drive-thru. She was alone in the front area, wiping down tables and preparing for the morning rush when she heard the front door chime. This was impossible. The doors were locked. She had checked them herself just an hour earlier. A man stood in the entrance, tall and gaunt, wearing a dirty baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, and there was something wrong with the way he moved. Too fluid, too quiet. "We're closed," Lily called out, her voice echoing in the empty restaurant. "Drive-through only." The man didn't respond. Instead, he walked directly to the counter, his footsteps making no sound on the tile floor. When he reached the register, he looked up, and Lily saw his face clearly for the first time. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were completely black. Not just dark brown or hazel, but black, like looking into a deep well at midnight. When he smiled, his teeth were stained dark red. "I'm hungry," he said, his voice raspy and dry. "Very hungry." Lily's training kicked in, despite her terror. She moved toward the panic button behind the register, but the man's head snapped toward her movement with inhuman speed. "Don't," he whispered, though his lips didn't seem to move properly. "Just food. I need food." What would you like?" Lily managed to ask, her hand trembling as she reached for the register keys. The man leaned forward across the counter, and Lily caught a smell that made her stomach lurch. It wasn't just unwashed clothes or body odor. It was something organic and rotting, like meat left out in the sun for days. "Something fresh," he said, his black eyes never leaving hers. "Something warm. Something that used to breathe." Lily's blood went cold. She backed away from the counter, but the man reached across and grabbed her wrist. His fingers were ice cold and felt wrong, like they had too many joints. "The meat in your freezer," he continued, his grip tightening. "It's not fresh enough. I can smell it from here. Old. Dead too long." She tried to pull away, but his strength was incredible. His fingernails, she realized, weren't fingernails at all, but something sharp and curved, digging into her skin. "Let me go," she whispered. The man tilted his head, studying her like she was an interesting specimen. "You smell fresh," he said. "Young, healthy. When was your last meal?" Lily's mind raced. The drive-through headset was at the other end of the counter. The phone was in the office. The panic button was right behind the register, but she couldn't reach it with him holding her arm. I can make you whatever you want from the menu," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I can make you whatever you want from the menu," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Your menu doesn't have what I need." That's when Lily noticed something that made her knees weak. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she could see that the man cast no reflection in the stainless steel surfaces behind the counter. The metal showed her own terrified face, the register, the menu boards, but where the man should have been, there was nothing. "Please," she whispered. The man's grip loosened slightly, and Lily saw her chance. She yanked her arm free and dove for the panic button. Her finger had barely touched the red surface when she heard a sound that shouldn't exist. The man was laughing, but the sound was coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the fryers in the kitchen. She spun around, but the front of the restaurant was empty. The man was gone. The front door was still closed and locked. The chime hadn't rung. Lily stood there, shaking, looking at her wrist where 5 deep gouges marked where the man's fingers had been. The wounds were already starting to turn black around the edges. The police arrived within minutes of the alarm, but they found no signs of forced entry. The security cameras showed Lily working alone, then, suddenly, diving for the panic button, for no apparent reason. On the footage, she appeared to be talking to empty air, but Lily knew what she had experienced. And when she went to the hospital to have her wounds treated, the doctor couldn't identify what had caused the infection that was spreading up her arm. The tissue around the scratches was dying, turning the same gray color as the man's skin. Lily quit that night and moved to Portland 3 weeks later. The infection eventually stopped spreading, but the scars never faded. She still has nightmares about black eyes and the smell of rotting meat. The McDonald's on Arden Way installed new locks and security systems, but they've had trouble keeping overnight staff ever since. 3 other managers have reported similar encounters with customers who couldn't have been there. Atkinson Rodriguez thought he'd seen everything during his 2 years working the overnight drive-thru at the McDonald's on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. Drug deals, drunk celebrities, homeless people looking for free food. But nothing prepared him for what happened on that fog-covered night in October. It was just past 3 in the morning when the red sedan pulled up to the drive-thru speaker. Atkinson was alone in the restaurant, except for Carlos, the cook, who was in the back prep area listening to music through his headphones. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" Atkinson said into his headset, watching the car through the window. The fog was so thick he could barely make out the vehicle's shape, but he could see there were at least 3 people inside. The response that came through his headset made him freeze. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded wrong, distorted, like she was speaking from inside a tunnel or underwater. "We'd like to order dinner for our family," the voice said. "Sure, what can I get you?" Atkinson replied, pulling up a new order screen. "We need enough food for 7 people, but it has to be special. It has to be prepared exactly right." Atkinson had dealt with picky customers before. "Okay, what kind of special preparation?" There was a long pause. Through the static of the headset, Atkinson could hear what sounded like whispered conversation in the car, but he couldn't make out the words. It sounded like more than 3 voices now. "The meat needs to be very rare," the woman finally said. "As rare as possible, and we don't want any of the normal seasonings. No salt, no preservatives, just the meat." "I'm sorry, but we cook our burgers to specific safety standards," Atkinson explained. "I can't serve undercooked meat." "Then we'll need something else," the voice said, and now it sounded closer, like the woman was speaking directly into his ear instead of through the drive-thru speaker. "Something fresh, something warm." Atkinson looked out at the car again. The fog had gotten thicker, and he could no longer see inside the vehicle clearly, but he could see that there were definitely more than 3 people in there now. The windows were fogged up from the inside, and there were shapes moving in the back seat. "Ma'am, I can only serve you items from our regular menu," he said, trying to keep his voice professional despite the growing unease in his stomach. "Check your walk-in cooler," the voice said. "The one in the back. Check what's hanging there." Atkinson's blood went cold. There was no way someone in the drive-thru could know the layout of their kitchen. The walk-in cooler was at the very back of the restaurant, past the prep area and the office. "I'm going to need you to place a regular order or move along," Atkinson said, his hand moving toward the manager override button that would allow him to skip to the next customer. "We already placed our order," the woman said, and her voice was different now, hungrier. "2 hours ago. Check the cooler, Atkinson." She had used his name. His name tag was turned around and not visible from the drive-thru window. Even if it were visible, the fog was too thick to read it. Against every instinct telling him not to leave his post, Atkinson walked toward the back of the restaurant. Carlos was still in prep, his back turned, knife flashing as he chopped vegetables for the morning shift. The walk-in cooler door was slightly ajar, which was strange because they always kept it sealed tight to maintain temperature. Atkinson could see his breath in the cold air as he pulled the heavy door open. What he found inside made him stumble backward. Hanging from the meat hooks where they normally stored beef and chicken were 7 white paper bags, McDonald's takeout bags. Each one was tied with what looked like red ribbon, but as Atkinson stepped closer, he realized it wasn't ribbon at all. It was hair. Long strands of human hair, tied in neat bows. The bags were moving slightly, as if something inside them was still alive. And they were warm. He could see steam rising from each one in the cold air of the cooler. Atkinson grabbed one of the bags and looked inside. What he saw made him drop it immediately. The bag contained what looked like fresh raw meat, but it wasn't beef or chicken or pork. The texture was wrong, the color was wrong, and there were fingernails mixed in with it. He heard footsteps behind him and spun around to find Carlos standing in the doorway, his face pale with terror. "Atkinson," Carlos whispered. "There's no one at the drive-thru." They rushed back to the front of the restaurant. The drive-thru was empty. No car, no people, no tire tracks in the fog-dampened asphalt. The order screen showed no pending transactions, but the bags were still in the cooler. 7 of them, warm and moving slightly, filled with meat that hadn't come from any supplier. Atkinson and Carlos called the police and quit their jobs that same night. The health department closed the restaurant for 3 days while they investigated, but the bags had vanished by the time officials arrived. The security cameras showed Atkinson and Carlos working normally, then suddenly, both men running out of the building in panic. No footage of any customers, no record of any drive-thru orders after midnight. The restaurant reopened, but they discontinued overnight service permanently. The walk-in cooler was replaced entirely, but some of the day shift workers claim they still occasionally find strange packages in there. Always 7 of them, always tied with hair instead of ribbon. Atkinson moved back to his hometown in Texas and refuses to eat at McDonald's. He still has nightmares about the woman's voice asking for fresh meat and the sound of something moving inside those warm paper bags. Jessica Martinez had been working the overnight shift at the McDonald's on University Avenue in San Diego for 8 months when she received the strangest delivery request of her life. It was a slow Thursday night around 1:30 in the morning, and she was manning the drive-thru while her coworker Brandon handled the kitchen. The phone rang, which was unusual because they didn't typically take phone orders during overnight hours. The caller ID showed a local number. "McDonald's on University. How can I help you?" Jessica answered. "I need a delivery," said a man's voice. He sounded older, maybe in his 60s, and spoke very slowly. "Sir, we don't do deliveries from this location," Jessica explained. "You'd need to use a delivery app, but those don't operate this late." "This is different," the man said. "This is a special arrangement. I spoke with your manager yesterday. The delivery is already paid for." Jessica frowned. Their manager had mentioned nothing about special deliveries. "What's the order?" 20 Big Macs, 10 large fries, 10 chocolate shakes, and it needs to be delivered to 4247 Maple Street, the gray house with the red door. "Sir, I really don't think we have any delivery arrangements, and even if we did, I can't leave the restaurant unattended with only one other employee. The food is for my family," the man continued, as if Jessica hadn't spoken. "We haven't eaten in days. We're so very hungry, and we can't leave the house." There was something in his tone that made Jessica uncomfortable, a desperation that seemed too intense for someone ordering fast food. "Let me check with my manager," she said, putting the call on hold. She walked back to the kitchen where Brandon was cleaning the fryers. "Did Rick say anything about special deliveries tonight?" she asked. Brandon shook his head. "No special anything. Why?" Jessica explained the call, and Brandon laughed. Sounds like some old guy trying to scam free food. Just tell him no. But when Jessica returned to the phone, the line was dead. She hung up and went back to her closing duties, assuming that was the end of it. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. McDonald's on University. This is about the delivery to 4247 Maple Street. The same man's voice said. You didn't call back. Sir, as I explained, we don't do deliveries, but the food is already prepared. The man's voice was strained now, almost panicked. I can smell it from here. 20 Big Macs, 10 fries, 10 shakes. It's sitting there getting cold. Jessica looked around the restaurant. They hadn't prepared any large orders. The warming trays held maybe 6 patties left over from the evening rush. Sir, we haven't prepared any food for you. There's been a misunderstanding. Look in your walk-in cooler, the man said, his voice now barely above a whisper. Look in the bags on the bottom shelf. Jessica's heart started beating faster. How do you know about our walk-in cooler? Please, the man said, and now he sounded like he was crying. My family is so hungry. We've been waiting so long. The food is getting cold. Against her better judgment, Jessica walked to the walk-in cooler and opened the door. On the bottom shelf were 4 large McDonald's delivery bags that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Each bag was packed full, and they were warm to the touch. Jessica opened one of the bags with trembling hands. Inside were Big Macs, exactly as ordered. But something was wrong with them. The meat looked too red, almost purple, and it was still warm in a way that made her stomach turn. The buns were soft and fresh, but they had a sweet smell that reminded her of flowers at a funeral. Oh my God, she whispered, backing away from the cooler. She ran back to the phone, but the line was dead again. When she tried calling the number back, she got a recording saying the number was disconnected. Brandon found her standing by the phone, shaking. When she showed him the bags in the cooler, his face went white. We need to call the police, he said. But before Jessica could dial, the delivery bags began to move. Not the food inside them, but the bags themselves, rustling and shifting, as if something was trying to get out. Jessica and Brandon grabbed their keys and ran from the restaurant, leaving the doors unlocked and the lights on. They called the police from the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station 3 blocks away. When the officers arrived at the McDonald's, they found no delivery bags in the cooler, no evidence of any unusual activity. The security cameras showed Jessica and Brandon working normally, then suddenly both employees fleeing the building for no apparent reason. The phone records showed no incoming calls after midnight, but the next morning, the day manager found something that made the police reopen their investigation. On the back door of the restaurant, someone had spray painted an address in red, 4247 Maple Street. When the police checked that address, they found an empty lot. There had never been a house there, gray or otherwise. The lot had been vacant for over 30 years. Jessica transferred to a day shift position at a different McDonald's across town, but she still gets phone calls sometimes. Always the same man's voice, always asking about the delivery to Maple Street, always insisting that his family is hungry and waiting. She's had her number changed 3 times, but the calls keep coming. David Kim was the assistant manager at the McDonald's on Blackstone Avenue in Fresno, and he prided himself on running a tight overnight operation. He'd been working there for 4 years and had seen his share of strange customers, but nothing had prepared him for what happened on his last night at the restaurant. It was just past 2 in the morning, and David was in the process of shutting down the dining room when he noticed the man sitting in the corner booth. This was impossible because David had personally escorted the last customer out at closing time, which was midnight on weekdays. The man was elderly, maybe 70, wearing a rumpled brown suit that looked like it was from several decades ago. His hair was white and neatly combed, and he sat perfectly still with his hands folded on the table in front of him. "Excuse me, sir," David called out, "We're closed. I'm going to need you to leave." The man didn't respond. He didn't even seem to hear David. David walked closer to the booth, and that's when he noticed something that made his skin crawl. There was no food in front of the man. No wrappers, no drink cups, no tray. Just his folded hands and a small pool of something dark on the table. "Sir?" David said again, now standing directly beside the booth. The man slowly lifted his head and looked at David with eyes that were completely clouded over with cataracts. Blind eyes, but somehow David knew the man was seeing him clearly. "I've been waiting for you to close," the man said in a voice like rustling paper. "We closed 2 hours ago," David replied. "How did you get in here?" The man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white and too perfect for someone his age. "I've been coming here every night for 63 years. Same booth, same time, same order." David felt a chill run down his spine. The McDonald's on Blackstone had only been open for 12 years. Before that, the lot had been empty. "Sir, I think you're confused. This restaurant hasn't been here that long." The man's smile widened. "Oh, but it has. Just not the way you see it." David looked around the dining room, and his heart nearly stopped. The restaurant looked different. The walls were wood-paneled instead of the usual McDonald's decor. The floor was checkered linoleum instead of tile. The counter was chrome and curved, like something from the 1950s. Most disturbing of all, there were other customers. An elderly woman in a floral dress sat at a table near the window, picking at a piece of pie that looked moldy. A young couple in outdated clothes shared a milkshake, but the liquid in the glass was thick and black. A family with 3 children occupied a large booth, but the children's faces were blurred, like looking at them through frosted glass. "Welcome to Eddie's Diner," the old man said. "Been serving the finest food in Fresno since 1962. David blinked hard and shook his head. When he opened his eyes, the restaurant was back to normal. Modern McDonald's decor, empty tables, familiar surroundings. But the old man was still there, still smiling. "What do you want?" David whispered. "Same thing I order every night," the man said. "A cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. Black coffee. No cream, no sugar. We don't serve pie. This is McDonald's." The man's expression didn't change. "Check the display case." David turned toward the front counter, and there was a glass display case that definitely hadn't been there before. Inside were several pies on rotating stands, just like the ones you'd see in an old-fashioned diner. Apple, cherry, chocolate cream. They looked fresh, but there was something wrong with them. The crusts were too brown, almost burned, and the filling that oozed from the slices was dark and thick. "This isn't possible," David said, backing away from the case. 63 years, the old man repeated. "Same booth, same order. Never missed a night." David's hands were shaking as he reached for his cell phone to call his manager. But when he looked at the screen, the display showed the date as October 15th, 1962. "I died in this booth," the old man said conversationally. "Heart attack. Right there where I'm sitting. Fell face first into my apple pie. They found me the next morning when the breakfast shift came in." The pool of dark liquid on the table was getting larger, spreading across the surface and dripping onto the floor. The diner closed down after that. People said it was cursed. Bad luck. The building sat empty for 50 years before McDonald's bought the lot. David tried to run for the exit, but his legs wouldn't move. It felt like the floor had turned to quicksand, holding him in place. "But I never left," the old man continued. "Every night at closing time I come back. And every night I wait for someone to serve me my pie." The restaurant around them was shifting again. Sometimes it was the modern McDonald's, sometimes the old diner. The other ghostly customers flickered in and out of existence, their movements leaving trails of shadow in the air. "Please," David whispered, Just tell me what you want me to do." The old man pointed to the display case. One slice of apple pie, black coffee, same as always. David forced himself to move toward the case. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the glass door. The pie slice he lifted out was warm and heavy, much heavier than it should have been. The coffee that poured from the ancient coffee pot behind the counter was thick and bitter, with an oily film on the surface. He carried the order to the old man's booth on unsteady legs. The man smiled as David set the plate and cup on the table. "Thank you," he said. "Same time tomorrow night?" David nodded, not trusting his voice. The old man took a bite of the pie, and David watched in horror as worms spilled from the filling onto the plate. The coffee in the cup had turned black and viscous, like motor oil. "Delicious," the man said, chewing slowly. "Just like Martha used to make." David closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the restaurant was back to normal. The old man was gone. The booth was empty. The display case had vanished, but on the table where the man had been sitting was a coffee cup. It was cracked and stained, and at the bottom was a thick residue that looked like dried blood. David quit that night and moved to Sacramento the following week. The McDonald's on Blackstone still operates, but they've had trouble keeping overnight staff. The new employees report seeing an elderly man in the corner booth after closing time, always asking for pie and coffee. The managers have tried blocking off that booth, but customers still report seeing someone sitting there. Always the same man. Always waiting patiently with his hands folded, watching the staff with blind white eyes that somehow see everything.